Welcome to Tales Arcane. Roleplay can be challenging, especially if you're new to D&D or the TTRPG world in general. I happen to have run a lot of one-shots and campaigns for people who had little to no experience playing a role in one of these games, and the thing they struggled with the most was losing themselves in the character and getting past their own sense of self-consciousness. Maybe they felt awkward, they felt shy, and who can blame them? They probably had never done anything like this before. In this video, we're covering the 3 keys to unlocking good roleplay at your table. Now, these are all simple tips, but they've made my players a lot more happy with their roleplay, and they've made my life a lot easier as a result. Before we go on, a massive thank you to my patrons who, as always, are supporting what I do here on the channel. They help me thrive and grow as a creator. I post weekly content over there and bigger monthly supplements and adventures on Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description if you're interested, but if not, liking, sharing, commenting and subscribing is also immensely appreciated and really helps to get the videos out there. Now let's talk about the 3 keys of roleplay. I often see people talking about the importance of asking questions to elicit roleplay responses, but what I really want to focus on is specificity and the utility of asking precise questions. Looking at a player who feels a bit shy or awkward and saying, "How do you feel right now?" or "How would your character feel right now?" isn't necessarily going to get the best response. Instead, let's get precise. You're a dwarven warrior whose brother died in a dragon attack, and right now you're looking at a mural depicting a huge red dragon breathing fire down on a burning village. What's your emotional response to that right now? Do you feel the emotions rising up? Do you feel anger? Or are you kind of keeping that down and maintaining a stoic facade? Suddenly the player is thinking about one key element from their tragic backstory. They're thinking about a single stimulus, in this case, the mural. And they're being given basically 2 options. Do they feel a strong emotional sense of anger or loss? Or do they cram that down and maintain a more stony exterior? Yes, it's a bit railroady to give the player those 2 sort of pre-made responses, but what I'm doing is collapsing all the potential responses down to a manageable choice, 2 ways that they can go, and in that moment, they may actually feel more comfortable picking a 3rd option and elaborating a little bit. Maybe they talk about how the emotion begins to rise, but then they clamp it down and they just channel that anger into a sense of desire for vengeance. They're going to feel a little bit more comfortable doing that because you set up the scene around them, reminded them what they need to be thinking about, reminding them who their character really is in that moment, and giving them a little bit of space and support to make a roleplay decision. The point is, when we as DMs ask our players precise questions that remind them who it is they're trying to roleplay, it can encourage them to be more comfortable at the table and make them less likely to be paralyzed by indecision. The example I just talked about, Darian and his brother who died in a dragon attack, is an example of non-social roleplay, and I cannot stress how good non-social roleplay is as a way to bring players out of their shell. Social roleplay is obviously players talking to each other in character, haggling for a better price from an NPC, confronting a villain and saying something badass as they land a killing blow. Non-social roleplay steps away from that. It's something that maybe happens without dialogue, it maybe happens internally for the player character, and it's a great way to let the players have a chance to kind of work out who they are as a character, especially early on in the campaign. If a player has taken on the role of a hulking barbarian, have them look across the tavern and see an equally large and hulking half-orc meet their eyes in a kind of threatening, intimidating manner. Ask the player, do you want to hold the half-orc's gaze, or do you want to look away and kind of de-escalate the situation? Now, you don't actually have to roll intimidation checks or worry about that stuff. Just ask them what they want to do in that situation and give them a chance to potentially stare down this half-orc who's given them evils from across the bar. You can have the orc shuffle slightly, look a little bit nervous suddenly, and look away. Nothing really happened, but suddenly the player feels just a little bit more like they know who their character is. Their character is a big, hulking person who's standing in a bar and staring down other people in the bar who might be intimidating, but not to your player character, and suddenly you feel a little bit more present in this world, this fantasy world that you and the DM are building. The druid witnesses a tree being felled. The paladin sees a hungry orphan child by the road begging for scraps. A player is reminded of where their character came from and gently reminded to think about who their character is in the present. Social roleplay will come in time, but non-social roleplay is a really good way to warm the players up, break them in, and help them find their feet as their characters. If you're into the gym, it's a little bit like doing rack pulls for a while before building up to switching on to full deadlift. For obvious reasons, you want to reward roleplay at your table. You don't want to do it too much, because some people are just naturally better at roleplay than others, and you don't want to make those others feel that they're being penalised for not being quite as fast to develop their roleplay skills as perhaps another player is. The common wisdom is to give inspiration as a reward for roleplay. That works, but here's an alternative way to do it, which in my opinion works slightly better than just giving out inspiration. If a player does some good roleplay, give them a reward that formalises a little benefit from that roleplay. Here's an example. Let's say a player wants to get an item a bit cheaper. It's a very simple example, but it works. They go to the merchant, and instead of just trying to roll persuasion, they push past their natural kind of awkwardness, and they do a little bit of roleplay. They try to butter the merchant up a little bit, they talk about how much they like their store, and then eventually they build up and they make a persuasion roll. It goes well, and they've convinced the merchant. But what they've really done is some good roleplay, and that's what you want to reward. So you write down in a little bit of paper, essentially the name of the merchant, and a little reward that is now associated with that merchant. You essentially formalise the player's growing relationship with the merchant. Now, the player has maybe a D10 that they can add to another persuasion roll that relates to that merchant in some way, or they have advantage on a roll that relates to the merchant in some way. Essentially, you write down a bit of paper that the merchant has a positive disposition towards them, and that is a kind of relationship the player can cash in at a later date. You can give this little item a name, or ask the player to give it a name. It could be commercial connections or merchant's favour, something like that. And you note that down, or they note that down, and now they've got that for later. They might never cash it in, but the point is that they feel this little sense of instant positive feedback. They roleplayed, and as a result of that, and you make clear to them that this is a direct result of the roleplay, they get this little thing that is almost like a badge that says, you did some good roleplay, you might get some benefit from this later on. The reward is so specific and rooted in that one moment. It was almost generated by the player. And so other players are less likely to feel that the DM is just handing out freebies to anyone who does a good bit of roleplay. Instead, it's like, well, if you do roleplay, you generate a little custom reward of your own. As an alternative example, let's go back to our dwarven warrior Darion, whose brother was tragically killed by a dragon. He's looking at that mural, and maybe the player is able to summon up some emotion for Darion. He talks about how at first that heat rises in him, that sense of anger and loss, then he channels it and he finds this cold, calm anger and rage inside him, which is all channeled into his desire for vengeance against the dragon that killed his brother, and his face was very calm and almost kind of impassive, emotionless. He does this little description of the roleplay, and you give him a little custom item. You could call it something else rather than item, like a bond or a connection or something. We'll come up with a cool name later on. I usually just call them items. You give them a little custom item, and it could be called Revenge's Suite, or Draconic Revenge, or whatever it is. And now, perhaps the stipulation of this particular reward is that when they fight that dragon or a dragon later on, they can add a d10 to one of their rolls, or they can add a d10 to some of their damage. I find this to be a really fun, organic way to reward roleplay while still keeping it all quite immersive. But it won't work for everyone. If you do try it and it works at your table, let me know, because I really like this, and it's something I've started to work in only relatively recently, and I'm excited to keep building into my campaigns in the future. Those are my 3 keys to unlock good roleplay at your table. See what I'm doing here? I'm trying to workshop some catchy sort of clickbaity phrases to draw new viewers into the video. I don't know if it's working, but I'll keep working on it. Key number 1, obviously, ask these precise questions that within their wording almost reinforce and remind the player about their roleplay and how to engage in it. encouraging them to just think a little bit more about who they are at the table. Key number 2 was non-social roleplay, giving players a chance to engage in roleplay that doesn't necessarily demand an instant kind of back and forth with an NPC, doesn't put them under pressure to speak or have an accent. And key number 3 was bring in these small organic rewards which are generated from the act of roleplay and which the player can pocket and feel good about, encouraging them to roleplay in the future. I hope you found some value in this video. I hope you found it useful. Again, like, share, comment, all that stuff is phenomenal, but I just really appreciate if you've watched it this far, that you watched it this far. The response to the long form videos has been really positive so far, and it just means a lot that everyone's watching and enjoying. I appreciate it.